Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our webinar today. My name is Peter Baddeley, and today's topic is going to be effective archiving and lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams. In terms of me, I'm the CEO of ProvisionPoint. I've been working with the business now for 6 years. Before that, in total, I've had 20 years working with different Microsoft collaboration technologies, SharePoint, obviously, Microsoft Teams, and some of the wider stack. And my main focus is advising organizations in their migration and adoption of the Microsoft Cloud. So today's webinar is all about Teams and archiving and lifecycle. And I took this quote actually from the Microsoft website, which is, each team has a beginning when the team is created and the channels are set up, a middle when the team is used and collaboration occurs to match the rhythm of the workflow, and sometimes an end when the team has completed its purpose and reached the end of its life. Now, that's sort of quite interesting to me. I mean, personally, I always think every team should have an end point. Even if it's a long-running team, there'll be a point where we don't use that anymore. It needs to be archived or maybe even removed from our environment. And so that brings us on to sprawl. And this is something which I talk to organizations about quite a lot. At its core, sprawl is all about there just being too many teams, and users then therefore find it difficult to find the correct information. Searching teams isn't great anyway, but then if you've got access to 40, 50 teams, it can be very difficult to find the correct information. And what's the outcome of that? Well, it's a few different things. Firstly, users give up and get frustrated. Secondly, they actually find the wrong information. Maybe it's out of date. Maybe it's information they shouldn't have access to anymore. Or thirdly, it's that risk associated with shadow IT. So users frustrated with teams becoming too cluttered, start using other services, Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, other services which you can't govern as tightly and control as much as the Microsoft Cloud landscape. So we want them to continue to use Teams, but we need to support them. And when we're considering the life cycle of our team, we're probably talking about 4 key things. We're considering what is the endpoint, and these things can be different for different organizations. So for some organizations, every team might have a 12-month life and then it should be archived. For others, it might be driven by the project and when the project ends. Others might be defined by their data retention policies. Equally, there might be granularity within a specific organization for different types of teams. And then what happens when our team expires, when the life cycle ends? Do we archive? Do we delete? Do we do something else? And then how do we engage both users in the process so that they feel engaged and take responsibility for the life cycle of their team? And how can administrators and compliance managers monitor things and make sure that those lifecycle policies are applied correctly? And that's really where ProvisionPoint 365 comes in. There's 2 key areas I'm going to show you today. First of all is the lease management. This allows us to set an expiry point for our team. Now, this can be driven by different factors. It might be that we have that requirement for 1 year, 90 days, 5 years expiry point for all of our teams. It might be dynamic based on a project date or another piece of information relevant to that team. We can define what happens when our lease expires. So that could be, in the scenario I'm going to show you today, leveraging the archiving capability, setting it to be read-only, hiding it. So the team's still there, but it's not cluttering up my team interface. It's not making it difficult for me to see what teams are available. And finally, I'm going to show you a little bit around the extension of that lease and how we can empower team owners in that process. So let's move on to our first demo today. You should hopefully see here, I'm in Office 365, and I'm going to come here and I'm going to launch the ProvisionPoint Workspaces app. Now, I can either do that directly from the app launcher. We also have a Teams app. Now, today I'm going to be working in the English language, but we do have multi-language support. You'll notice here that I've got a range of templates for creating new teams. And one of the things we can do is we can apply a lease at the point of team creation. In this case, you'll see that it expires after 6 months and then the team is going to be archived. Now, those settings which we apply can be different for different templates. So here I've got another template, and this is going to be controlled instead, the lease, by my field. So over on the right hand side, you'll see a field called project end date, and that's going to set the expiry. So that controls how that lease is applied. Let's go and see it in action. So I've gone into a team which has already been created, and you can see this particular lease only has 23 days left. And I can manage that lease as an owner by coming in here and making a request to change the lease with or without approval, and I can extend that. Finally, any teams which are archived within ProvisionPoint workspaces will appear in this archived area. I can see in this case my lease was processed in July, and I can go and access the timeline to see a history of what activity happened, including you'll see there reminders were sent to the owners of the team to say this lease is going to expire on this specific date. Do you want to action that extension, which I showed you a minute ago? And let's talk a little bit more about that lease management, which I just showed you. So I showed you applying templates, which can control expiry in different ways. And then I showed you how that lease is managed using actions and timeline. In the administration of ProvisionPoint workspaces, we can define various settings. So we can define the archiving settings. In this case, I'm setting the archive state. I'm setting the team as archived within Teams. And I'm moving it to that archived view, which we saw within ProvisionPoint. So I can come in and still access that, access the history. If you want to, you can even allow authorized users, owners, administrators to restore that team and reapply a lease, depending on how you manage your lifecycle processes. And we can also configure those reminders. So we can set and design our own notification templates, how we want an email reminder sent to the owner, and what frequency. So in this example here, I will start sending reminders 10 days before the expiry point, and I will keep sending those reminders every 2 days. So again, all configurable per template, per organization. Lease is one pillar of what we do with lifecycle management. The second pillar is activity. So a lot of organizations will want to define that a team will, its lifecycle expire at a certain point, but that might be influenced by how the team is being used. Sometimes we can ask the owner to make that decision. Sometimes we can use the activity data around Teams and SharePoint to determine that. So ProvisionPoint Workspaces allows you to check on activity, including Teams channel updates, file modification, and SharePoint site access. Based on that activity, we can do different things. So we can report and notify administrators, compliance managers, Teams administrators, even the owners of the teams as well. Or we can control our expiry point. So we can either shorten a lease, expire a lease straight away and archive a team, or we can extend a lease automatically because the activity data is saying that our team is still being used. So let's show another short demo and you can see that in action. So you'll see here that I'm back in ProvisionPoint Workspaces, and this time I'm accessing the admin screen and I'm accessing our policy area. So we can define policies which check on different things, including things like external sharing, privacy, disabled owners, but also team activity, which this one is doing here. And any policy is made up of rules. And I'll show you an example of a rule here, where I've defined that I want a rule to check on site last modified. Has it been modified in the last 15 days? And you see here, we can define various rules, looking at modification, site access, channel activity. And we allow you to configure 3 different things. We can set the expiry date, we can report on activity, and we can notify based on activity or inactivity. With each of these options, we can configure them. So we can say things like, what is activity in our world? Is it that there has been a message in the Teams channel in the last 30 days, 90 days? So in this case, I'm saying, if my team channel hasn't had any activity in the last 30 days, I want to reduce my lease by a rule which I define. Equally, I could just report that or notify administrators based on those rules. And my policy can be made up of multiple different rules combined together. I access information on my policies through the job queue. So I can see one which is run here. It's saying that 50% are compliant, in which case 50% are inactive. I've only got 2 in my example. I can see some core reports. I can also dive in and see which teams meet my policy and which ones don't. And in this case, this team doesn't meet my policy. There hasn't been any modifications since the 21st of October. So I deem that non-compliant. And then whatever rules I define would then occur. So in this case, it's just telling me as an administrator, but I could have then influenced the life cycle and expiry point of my team based on that as well. Now, the important thing about everything I've shown you so far is that this works with either new teams created. So you want to go and create a new team from a template defined in ProvisionPoint workspaces. All of those policies and leases can be applied. Equally, it works with your existing teams in your organization. You can import those to be managed by ProvisionPoint workspaces. You can set those expiry points using leases, and you can immediately start running activity policies to check and see if they're being used still, and influence the expiry point and ultimate archiving of those teams based on that data. So to summarize what I've shown you today, ProvisionPoint Workspaces in terms of how it manages the life cycle of your teams and how it allows you to be more effective. Firstly, it lets you get control of both your new and existing teams. It allows you to apply the leases which you've defined to set an expiry point based on whatever your policy is. And that can be varied per different type of team. So you can be a bit more intelligent. Projects might well have a shorter life cycle than a department team or an area used for storing policy documents, for example. And you can enrich those lifecycle policies you put in place with leases with our activity policies, which allow you to monitor usage of your teams, your SharePoint sites, and control those expiry points. Combined together, this allows you a really flexible implementation of how you manage the life cycle of your teams, no matter where you are in your journey. If you've only got a couple of teams and you're just starting to roll it out, or even if you're migrating to the cloud and you want to put this sort of capability in, you can adopt ProvisionPoint from day one. If you've already got an existing estate of teams created and users are struggling to manage them, you're not sure which teams are being used, again, you can implement ProvisionPoint workspaces and help you to manage that. So with that, thank you for attending the webinar. Like I said, the recording will be made available to you shortly. And if you have any further questions, please come back to us directly.